Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
If our forthcoming film, The Killings of Tony Blair, is as good as the sensational new book, Blair Inc., The Man Behind the Mask, I'll be happy.
The book tours the horizon of Britain's most controversial Prime Minister, who took over the Labour Party, which he then renamed New Labour, before launching invasions and occupations. And the main topic of the book, the Everest of money, still piling up as we speak.
Some say that there's no regime with dungeons so dark or gallows so grim that Tony Blair and his coterie of family and friends won't work for them, as long as the price is right. Francis Beckett is a Labour man, but he co-authored Blair Inc. and is one of the country's leading Blair-ologists. He joins us now. Francis, I don't know, I've lost count of how many of your books I've got on my shelves. You are indeed prolific. Is 17th? 18th, your 18th book, and surely your finest. It is a brilliant, lavish production.
Thank you.
And I congratulate you on it. But my first question is about the timing. You're a Labour man, so am I, essentially. We both want Labour to win the forthcoming general election. Why bring out a book now that is potentially, surely, damaging to Labour?
Well, if we both want Labour to win the next general election, then I think that places us in a different category from Tony Blair. I don't think Tony Blair wants that at all. Every statement, everything that he has done in the past 6 months or so seems designed in a subtle and insidious way to undermine the Ed Miliband leadership. Now, I personally, we may differ on this, but I personally am a great admirer of Ed Miliband. I think he's a Clem-Attlee figure. What seems to concern Blair is that anybody else other than him or another convinced Blairite, another Blair acolyte, can possibly lead Labour to victory. So he makes all sorts of statements that quite intentionally are designed to undermine Ed Miliband, to say that the public have a problem with Ed Miliband. And he uses his tame campaign group within the Labour Party, which is called Progress, to try to fill the next parliament with as many tame Blairite MPs as he can manage. If Ed Miliband wins the next general election, it will be over Tony Blair's dead body.
Which segues neatly into the money, because one of the most controversial things, one of the most undermining things, in my view, that Blair has done in the last few months is to hand the Labour Party £105,000, which many would think was blood money in one way or another, and he's given it to a hapless 105 Labour candidates who must now, in their campaigns, defend the fact that they're using Tony Blair's money to fight their campaign election.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you about that. I think that the amount of money that each one of them has had, about £1,000, certainly may not necessarily have liked the way Tony Blair earns it from all sorts of dictators all over the world. But there are all sorts of far less pleasant sources of money.
As you know, but not everyone watching this will know, the quotation I used of Gallows Grim and Dungeons Dark comes straight from the Labour anthem, the red flag. It is true, isn't it, that there appear to be no limits to the venality of any tyranny that Tony Blair and family and friends will work for.
I'm afraid that is true, yes. There is no... The dictator of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev, is an extraordinarily good example. He was re-elected unopposed last time with, I think it was 92.5% of the vote.
But it is amazing to see a Labour Prime Minister and his right-hand man, the spin doctor Alastair Campbell. Their empire stretches far and wide. They're working for the Kuwaitis, they're working for the UAE, for a Saudi oil company, and so on. All the while, Mr. Blair continued to hold down for 7 long years, almost 8, the position of Middle East peace envoy.
Yeah.
Nobody see a conflict of interest in all that?
Well, of course, if it had been a proper government appointment, it would have been illegal for him to do all of those things. If he'd been a member of parliament, for example, then the rules, the Nolan rules, quite properly would have prevented him, would have said, no, this is a conflict of interest, you can't do it. He was only able to do it because of the kind of informality with which he was appointed as Middle East peace envoy. And one of the very first things he did as Middle East peace envoy was to go and visit the Emir of Kuwait. Now, he's got a very well-staffed office as Middle East peace envoy, the envoy's office. He didn't take one single member of staff from that office. Instead, he took Jonathan Powell, who was a senior consultant with Tony Blair Associates. Whether anything came out...
And who was with him in Downing Street before that.
And who was with him in Downing Street before that. Now, whether anything came out of that by way of Middle East peace, we really have no idea. We have no way of finding out. What we do know is that there was a £27 million consultancy contract with the Emir of Kuwait. And the perception persists that that job as Middle East envoy to Tony Blair seemed to be being used as a calling card all over the Middle East. Now, the fact is, his predecessor in the job, James Wolfenson, had worked, the former president of the World Bank, had worked very, very hard on Middle East peace, worked enormously hard, so hard he made himself ill. He earned the respect of the Palestinians. I was told by Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, the Palestinian negotiator, that she had an enormous admiration for what James Wolfenson had tried to do there. Tony Blair announced that he would spend 1 week a month in the region on the job, and actually the best information I can get is that it was about 2.5 days a month on that job. I don't think anybody would ever have blamed Tony Blair for failing to bring about peace in the Middle East. An awful lot of people have tried, and it's a pretty intractable sort of problem. But I think what they're going to blame him for, and should blame him for, is that he doesn't appear even to have tried. He sat on the job, which somebody else might have been doing, and might have wanted to put their heart and soul into it. And this seems to me to be, it's not only unforgivable, but extraordinary. Because the chance to make a contribution towards peace in the Middle East seems to me to fulfill the ambition of the most ambitious politician.
Indeed.
I can't imagine any politician given that chance not saying, oh, yes, I'll give it my best shot.
Though. It's been 7 years.
It's 7 years. It's 7 years.
7 lean years.
It's 7 years.
To get all biblical. 7 lean years for the Palestinians. 7 fat years, though, for the Blairs.
Yes.
And for Blair Inc.
Yeah.
Will Self, in our film, uses the phrase that he was astounded by the avarice of Tony Blair. Were you?
Yes. I had some, I wasn't perhaps immediately astounded because I had some idea before I started work. But I am astounded at how desperately he seems to, how much he's prepared to abase himself for money. I listened with horror to an extraordinary video that he contributed to that was telling the world what a fine chap Nazarbayev was.
I'm going to cut you short just because there's only time for me to ask you this. It's of no great import in the big picture, but what have you got in the book on Wendy Deng and the extraordinary friendship between our former Prime Minister and the former wife of Rupert Murdoch, who helped to put him there? Well,
the lawyers got most of it, I'm afraid. But
well, don't take any risks on RT.
No, I'll be very careful here. What we can tell you is I cannot tell you whether Tony Blair and Wendy Deng were at it. What I can tell you is that Rupert Murdoch is certain that they were, and this is doing Blair enormous damage in the one place that matters to him now, which is the United States of America. And there's a wrenching irony in all this, because you'll remember back in 1994 when he came in and said, no, the Labour Party is quite wrong to think that Rupert Murdoch's an enemy. We've got to make a friend of him. We've got to embrace him. And he went all over the world to pay court.
He's the godfather to one of their
children.
He is.
And yet now, quite suddenly, all that has fallen apart. Now he's saying, I can't get a decent showing in the press. The Murdochs, the press barons are against me. And I feel there's a wrenching irony all that. If the press baron... I suppose if it's Tony Blair versus Rupert Murdoch, you've got to say, what a shame somebody's got to win.
As Henry Kissinger almost said, it's a fantastic book, Blair Inc., The Man Behind the Mask. Francis Beckett, the co-author. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, George.
On the Sputnik. Coming up after the break, in the middle of the Malcolm X festival he's organising, Sukran Chandan on what Malcolm X means or should mean to us on the 50th anniversary of his murder. Welcome back to Sputnik.
50 years ago, in the Audubon ballroom in New York, the greatest black leader in America was gunned down in the most mysterious circumstances.
His murder came less than 2 years after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and 3 years before that of Dr. Martin Luther King, which in turn was followed 2 months later by the equally mysterious assassination of presidential hopeful Robert F. Kennedy. 4 dead leaders in 5 years. Must have been a turbulent time.
Our next guest has organized a wonderful program to mark the 50th anniversary.
He's Sukran Chandan, and he joins us now. Sukran, thanks for coming on board the Sputnik. Tell us about the festival and how people can get involved in it.
Well, the first annual Malcolm X Film Festival is an initiative of the Malcolm X movement, which is launching this August. And what we're intending to do on this very important anniversary, and we planned this 3 years in advance, because we knew in 2012 that 2015 was going to be a big anniversary in our political lives. The 50th martyrdom anniversary of Malcolm X, who's a towering and primary figure in the struggle against colonialism and neo-colonialism and white supremacy, etc. So we wanted to put together a series of events, and that's what we are delivering now. It's 7 film festival events in 6 cities across this island, also one, and the first of which was in West Belfast. And that was not out of coincidence, that was out of design, to salute the Irish freedom struggle in their contribution in fighting one of the greatest, bloodiest genocidal entities known to humanity, which is the British state, which is an international system of colonialism and neo-colonialism. It was a very successful event in West Belfast, at which Bernadette McCalliskey, the Irish revolutionary at the Battle of the Bogside, spoke at, and Jerry McLaughlin, a former Irish Republican Army prisoner of war and Sinn Féin member, spoke at as well. And they, as I said in my report from that event, translated Malcolm X for our Irish audience. So we continue now. We've had it in West Belfast, Oxford and Birmingham, and we continue this weekend in Brighton, and then on to Bristol, and 2 events in London. And people can find out about this if they search on Facebook, the first annual Malcolm X Film Festival.
Who killed Malcolm X?
Well, when I understand situations like this, I think there's 2 things that you have to consider. One, which groups are the most powerful involved in this, and who does it benefit the most? These are the 2 questions, I think, that are fundamental to unlocking the key to these mysteries. And I think it was because Malcolm X, much like Dr. King, actually, but much more profoundly and concretely, Malcolm X was the bridge between the black liberation struggle in the United States, and as Malcolm's daughter said, Ilyasa Shabazz, at the Oxford Film Festival, Malcolm X came from a very political family, whose family was involved in the Garveyite black liberation movement. And so the black liberation movement is connected to the global South, but what Malcolm did, which was very alarming for the powers that be in the United States, he was directly linking that struggle and actually saying, no, we're actually under the leadership of the actual existing struggle, and he was inspired by the Bandung non-aligned movement strategy. And
which marks the 60th anniversary this year.
Yes, the Indonesian government is marking that anniversary, I'm happy to hear as well. So Malcolm was saying, no, actually it's the African liberation movements who are showing us how we can win our freedom through their ideological frameworks and their practical frameworks. He was asked, do you think an organization like the Mau Mau should be formed in the United States? And he said, yes, I do, actually. So that was very alarming because it was the same time...
It alarms me.
May do as well. But it was the same time that Malcolm said that dollarism, i.e. neocolonialism, is impacting Africa. So the United States, the last thing he wanted to see was people like Malcolm X addressing the Organization of African States, which he did at the time, advocating justice and support for the Global South, African liberation movement, for the justice for black people.
So the proximate cause or practitioners of his murder were people who were ostensibly moved by schismatic reasons within the Nation of Islam. Do people still believe that story, or were these merely patsies for the power in the United States?
Well, exactly. I think even the Shabazz family will say very clearly that the people who had the main dominant hand in the assassination of Malcolm X was the FBI, CIA, and the police department, etc. But yes, there were patsies involved, and yes, there was an internal division and a schismatic division, as you put it, which unfortunately turned quite sour, extremely sour. And so, yeah, different parties are involved, but at the end of the day, I think even Farrakhan has had a rapprochement with the Shabazz family when the FBI was trying to operate a sting on Qibla Shabazz herself in falsely constructing a plot involving her in assassinating Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam. So there's complex factors at work.
How great could Malcolm X have become? Because his development was quite spectacular over quite a short period of time, his ideological, political development. But he had the charisma, the leadership qualities. He really could have been a contender in this most turbulent of times. The Vietnam struggle, which he was very clear about, unlike others in the Democratic Party who were indeed they were doing the bombing. I mean, could he have been an Obama? Could he, if that's not an insult, could he have actually burst into elected politics, for example?
Well, it's interesting you mention Obama, because in the Malcolm X Movement magazine, we produced some articles critiquing Manning Marable's book on Malcolm X of late, which he basically says that Malcolm was orienting himself to a kind of Obama-like politics, but I don't think that really stands true, because Malcolm, if anything, he was entrenching himself more profoundly and deeper with actually the liberation movements across the planet, which Obama has nothing to do. Actually, Obama has been facilitating what's a veritable recolonization of Africa, which was most traumatically expressed through the bombing of Libya in 2011. So I think Malcolm X and his martyrdom, in a way, really just universalized them even more greater. But I think Malcolm X and very much so Ben Bella in Algeria, Nkrumah in Ghana were saying to Malcolm, we know your life is under threat, please come work with us for African liberation and so-called third world liberation. Malcolm was committed to his project within the United States, but although he spent most of the time in the Middle East and Africa in the last 2 years of his life. So he was very much committed to that and facing whatever he needed to face. And if that meant death, he faced it and standing tall and proud. And I think that's what's so inspirational, and that's why we're holding this film festival with an incredible amount of speakers and supporting organizations, including the PFLP, including the Black Panther alumni, including the Libyan resistance, and others, that we're trying to develop a conversation and network building amongst the grassroots in linking the in relinking, I should say, ourselves, the current generation, to those who have come before in the Black and Asian radical tradition.
Well, let's talk about the current generation, because something's clearly gone wrong. In my introduction, I made the point that the United States, within 5 years, lost not one, but two outstanding black political figures who were, as you indicated, in any case, converging in their political line. But the United States has no such black leaders today. The Black Congress caucus is supporting Israel, is endorsing the bombing of country after country and so on. Obama's been such a gigantic disappointment. And I don't want to start on Britain. I mean, in the 60s and the 70s, from amongst the black population, real radical action, activity, and leadership was present. What's happened today?
Well, the daughters and sons of Malcolm in the 60s, and particularly the Black Panther Party, who are supporting the film festival, raised in a qualitative and quantitative level the anti-racist struggle in the United States and inspired the rest of the planet in so doing. But you're absolutely right. We are still living through a period of defeat, actually, which in Britain probably started in the early 80s. So, yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. But I think, again, the Obama phenomenon is quite important in this regard, because the neo-colonial system, in trying to elongate its attempts at hegemony across the planet, is trying to blackface. It's adopting black and Asian faces to its system to try and make its system more amenable and acceptable to the people of the global south. So that's a great challenge that we have. And as Ilyasa Shabazz said in her opinion piece in the Washington Post recently, that often we somehow, the whole hands up, don't shoot slogan is a defeatist one. It's one that revels in oppression, whereas we're in the politics of liberation. So again, it's to reconnect to that black radical tradition within the West and to reconnect to the existing global South struggle today.
How do you connect that with the Ferguson developments?
Which Obama has. I mean, the black people are being gunned down almost daily in the United States, and the black president of the United States is backing the police.
Exactly.
Quite, but also, I mean, that's true, but when we say Black Lives Matter, Black lives should matter on a global scale, not just in the United States and not just in Britain. But I think often one of the problematics of the Ferguson protest, and it's been great relatively and historically, it has seen an upsurge of youth taking to the streets against police brutality and against the system in general. But one thing I don't think we've broken out of is that neo-colonial shell, which Malcolm totally shattered, completely shattered, and he said our liberation is predicated on the liberation of the third world, of Africa and Asia. And that's what we're trying to reconstitute again. And that's why we're having Dr. Musa Ibrahim, Leila Khaled, Ilyasa Shabazz, Jerry McCaughlin, Bernadette McCalliskey, and all these other revolutionaries, and ZANU-PF as well in Zimbabwe, engaging directly to young people at the film festival to rebuild that unity that we lost.
Well, the best of luck with it. Thanks, Sukran Chandan, for that.
And that's all that we've got time for this week.
In fact, for a few weeks, because we're off for the general election. When are we back?
That's right. We'll be back Saturday, 16 May. But you can still stay in touch with us on Twitter, RT_Sputnik, and on Facebook. You can like us on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.